Michelle, welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the listeners out there. And your blog is such a great resource for applicants. So I'm so glad that that's available.
That's so nice of you to say, Michelle. I really appreciate it. And you went to Harvard Law, if I understand correctly, which is a school that a lot of folks in my audience want to go to. So I guess the biggest question is, what do you attribute your admission to Harvard Law to?
Oh, well, I went to Harvard Law quite a while ago, so the admissions landscape has changed so much since I applied. But my own admissions, I think, was because I had really strong numbers. And I think what has changed since when I applied and now is that you need more than your numbers to get into these top law schools. You really have to have a compelling reason for why you want to go to law school and communicate that in your application materials through letters of recommendation, the personal statement, and for schools now, including Harvard, sometimes an interview.
Wow. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So the numbers have become necessary, but not sufficient, right? You need something beyond just the numbers. Now, does Harvard Law, do they look at anything in the for anything in the personal statement uniquely compared to other schools? Is there a certain tone or theme they're looking for?
I wouldn't say there's a specific tone or theme that differentiates Harvard from any of the other schools. It's every school is going to be looking for a personal statement that communicates why an applicant is qualified to go to law school, what experiences have prepared them for this endeavor. But one thing with Harvard and with other law schools too is you have to pay attention to the formatting requirements. So I often get applicants who have these like gorgeous 3-page personal statements, but Harvard is pretty strict on 2 pages. So a lot of times those little details like 11-point font versus 12-point font are things that applicants may not realize are actually important, can impact the content of what you're trying to communicate. But law is in the details, and being able to show that you have read the instructions is something that is included in a holistic review of any application.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, so you said Harvard Law requires 2 pages. Other schools may allow more. And so what I can gather from that is that you may actually, as an applicant, may need to modify their personal statement for different schools. They couldn't necessarily reuse the same one for every school.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want to personalize your personal statement per school. So a good kind of template to get you started is to have a 3-page personal statement that you can then modify to 2 pages or even less if a school has, say, a 500 word limit. Like some schools are going to have different formatting requirements. And then also you may want to include some school specific content in your essay. So talking about like why a particular program interests you. So that can be modified per program. The key being you want to make sure you're submitting the right essays to the right program. You don't want to send Harvard your Columbia Law School application.
Yeah, of course not. That makes a lot of sense. The why our school essay in particular, you've got to personalize and do the due diligence, do the research for each school. Now, my understanding is that out of all the law schools out there, only a couple actually explicitly ask for one of those why our school statements. Like, for example, Yale has their famous 250-word essay on that. For the other law schools, do you recommend including that personalized essay as part of the main personal statement or as some sort of supplemental essay?
It depends. It depends on how much of the narrative, the personal narrative takes up. For a school like Harvard, they don't have a why Harvard component. I think Harvard is pretty convinced of its excellence and doesn't really need you to say why. And 2 pages is not a lot of space to include school-specific content. But some schools like Berkeley will have more of a looser, like 3 or 4 pages, and you may be able to embed some of that why Berkeley research into your personal statement, or it can be a separate essay, as you said, like a why Michigan essay. For the Yale 250, I don't think of it as necessarily being a why Yale essay per se. It's more of a tell us something about you as an applicant that it's essential, but you haven't communicated it elsewhere in your application, and do it in 250 words, which is tough.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for clarifying that. For the schools that are asking a why our school statement, or when you might want to personalize something about the essay to the particular school, what are some of the specifics an applicant might want to include or mention about the school?
So looking at school-specific programming, I think, is very effective. It's not only effective to help the admissions committee understand why you're interested in the program, but for an applicant to understand, why am I applying to this school? What does this school have to offer me? So looking at things like beyond just courses, clinics, journals, externship possibilities, any specialized credentials that may be part of that school, that the school has to offer. But the key is, when you're communicating this to law schools, is not to simply list, hey, you offer this clinic. It's to say, what do you hope to contribute to that clinic? Why is your experience going to be an asset? Because admissions committees know what their school has to offer you. They don't really know what you have to offer it and what you're hoping to get out of those particular programs.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about relating those specific details about the school back to you as an individual and as an applicant.
Absolutely. Yeah. You always want to keep yourself in the spotlight, even if you're talking about something else, another school, or if you're in a personal statement and you're writing about somebody who is inspirational or influential to you. It's not an essay about, say, a grandfather who went to law school or a student you worked with if you were an educator. It's about you and bringing the content back to you and the focus back to you.
That makes a lot of sense. How can an applicant be sure that they are making it personal enough? Is there a certain benchmark or ratio of like I versus they that you want to have in the just to make it really clear?
It would be so easy if it was so much easier if writing a personal statement was like as definitively logical as the LSAT say, where it's like, there's clearly a right answer here, or there's clearly like a right ratio of
Yeah, you can see my background here.
Yeah, right. I would say though that the brainstorming process of writing is essential, right? You want to brainstorm before you try to work on what's that key opening hook, and thinking about what are some of the key experiences that an applicant has that have shaped who they are today. So it's like, how does the past influence the present? And then how is the present going to inform the future and an applicant's career goals? So you want to find that balance between including strong, I call it anecdotal evidence, because your admissions committee readers are going to be lawyers, and lawyers love evidence. So you want to ground the personal in experience and having kind of a narrative thread that connects various experiences together. And I think the way that you make sure it's about you is not to just say what you have done, but what you think about what you've done. So it's it's very introspective and reflective, and then it's going to inevitably help an admissions committee reader get to know you on a more personal basis.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, the classic question is, the applicant thinks they haven't done anything impressive. What do they talk about? How do they narrate their walk to the supermarket? What are they going to talk about that they can relate to law school?
I mean, every person has done something that's impressive. So I think that it's about, again, going through that brainstorming phase and thinking about what are experiences that have shaped me as a human being, and that are also informing my decision to go to law school. So ideally, you have some kind of reason why you want to spend the next 3 years reading case law, or 4 years if you're doing some kind of part-time program, and figuring out like what is going to impress an admissions committee. But I also advise the applicants I work with, don't try, especially for a first draft, to write this essay for an anonymous, like shadowy admissions committee reader. Write this essay for yourself. Like, think about what experiences are important to you and why you want to go to law school. And then it's going to be inherently valuable and a lot more fun to write. So yeah, it needs to be personal in that sense too. Like, if it's personally valuable to you as a writer, then it's going to resonate more with your readers.
That makes a lot of sense. That seems natural. Having a specific person in mind, like an avatar of who the officer is, and picture them as a person. Like maybe they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s and they're a man or a woman, whatever it might be, and just kind of go from there. I'm wondering if there are any standout examples you've seen recently or over the course of your career of a particularly great essay that an average applicant could write, and then maybe a not so great essay that an average applicant might also write, so they can avoid the bad one and go for the good one.
Yeah. Okay. So, essays that are really, I think, successful are ones that sometimes I work with applicants who feel like they have a common experience. Um, like I've worked with applicants who are, say, either immigrants themselves or the first generation of immigrant parents. And they're like, well, everybody kind of has this story. I'm like, no, but what makes your story unique are the particulars. So helping give that story its space to talk about the details and what has actually influenced those people is going to be more effective. I think in terms of like essays that don't work, I would never let an applicant I'm working with submit an essay that's terrible. But I have seen some first drafts that aren't always successful. And for a variety of reasons. One might have been an applicant wanted to write about struggling with mental illness, say. And that's something that is great to share in the sense of humanizing you as an applicant. It was important to this person and who she was. But what made the essay strong is that she ended up doing a lot of work with mental illness and raising awareness and starting a club on campus. So it wasn't an essay about, here I went through this hardship and pity me. It was, here I went through this hardship and came through, and I'm remarkable because of what I've been able to do to overcome this hardship and then help other people. And then that led right into like why she wanted to go to law school.
Well, thanks for that. That sounds like a great way to put a positive spin on it and tie it all together, demonstrating a story of growth and overcoming adversity. So I really like that. And this actually reminds me of something I wanted to ask you about, which is the character and fitness portion, because I can easily see an applicant writing some sort of essay about mental illness in a way that might worry the admissions committee in a way. They don't want to have someone dealing with a difficult situation in law school, not making it through or worse. So I'm wondering, what are some things that law school applicants might want to disclose? What might they not want to disclose? And of course, what do they need to disclose in order to avoid potential problems later?
Yeah. So for the character and fitness portion of an application, read those carefully because you want to make sure that you're answering them honestly, and you want to err on the side of disclosure, like disclosing what is expected of you. One of the very practical reasons why you want to err on the side of disclosure is because, at the end of the day, an admissions committee is not going to have the time to do a background check on you and make sure like, hey, did you actually get that speeding ticket or not? But when you apply if you've taken the bar and passed it, in which case, like, congratulations, you then have to apply to join your state bar. And there's a very thorough character and fitness evaluation there. And those committees may ask for your law school application, may compare and contrast, like, what did you disclose? What did you fail to disclose? And so it could be an issue at that point. So err on the side of disclosure, but be specific in terms of the questions you're responding to. So in terms of, say, like a mental illness type situation, that's something to disclose if there's a reason to disclose it. If it's, say, tied to something else that is a requirement to disclose, like, for instance, I worked with an applicant who struggled with addiction and ended up having it triggered a lot of character and fitness questions. It was actually the applicant where I worked with who had the longest character and fitness portion that I've worked with. And because there were a lot of criminal charges that came about as a result of that, a lot of impact to like transcripts and grades. But this was a person who was at a point in life where the applicant was able to tell a redemption story, where the applicant was prepared to go to law school and hit the ground running and be successful because this person had gone through a recovery program, was continuing self-care, was not going to be a concern to an admissions committee now at present, but it was important to disclose those issues because there were a lot of resume gaps or criminal records that we had to share, that we had to disclose. So it made sense to talk about addiction in that context.
That makes a lot of sense. And anything that involved criminal charges, of course, an applicant would be required to disclose.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so the key with an applicant who's in that situation is to focus on the lessons learned to talk and be clear and transparent about, this is what happened, this is what I was going through, but here's how I've overcome, and here's why I'm going to be successful in law school.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, for this applicant, you said their character fitness disclosure was exceptionally long. How long was it approximately?
It depended on the school, because you had to tailor it per school depending on the questions. But for some schools, it was several pages. That is an outlier situation. The majority of applicants, you're going to have maybe like one or two small incidences that they need to disclose. And in that case, any addenda, I think a good rule of thumb is you don't want your addenda to overshadow your personal statement. So if you have a 2-page personal statement, ideally your addenda is going to be shorter than that, a half page maybe, because you want the admissions committee to focus their very limited amount of time on your resume, on your really strong letters of recommendation, on your personal statement, on your strengths. And then the addenda or character fitness response is just to help them to help address any red flags that may occur to them, or any issues that may be worrisome that you feel a need to disclose, but it's not the star of your application by any means.
That makes a lot of sense, Michelle. Thanks for that. I love the point you made about you don't want the character fitness to overshadow the other parts of the application. You don't want them to comprise the majority if you can avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the typical applicant who might have some sort of disclosure, maybe it involved underage drinking, maybe it involved possession, maybe it involved speeding tickets, more minor things of that nature. How long might each of those disclosures be on average? A couple hundred words?
Yeah, I like to shoot for like a half page, a couple hundred words, something that can be very clear and concise, and pay attention particularly to tone. You don't want to come across as coming up with excuses or whining. It's about, I think the tone you want to go for is accountability, that this is something that happened, but this is the lesson I learned from it. I acknowledge the mistakes I made, and it won't happen again.
Right. Thanks for that. Now, I'm wondering if we could shift gears a little bit and talk about what's happening over at LSAC with the policy changes they're making as the LSAT is offered more frequently, and many, many other things. But to start with, of course, the LSAT is going from being offered 4 times a year to more than double that, nearly every month going forward. How does that impact how admission officers might look at retakes?
I think that one of the other key components with the policy change is that there's now no cap on the amount of times an applicant can take it. But that doesn't mean that an applicant should use the test as practice, right? Like, you don't want to go into the LSAT being like, hey, and I hear applicants say this a lot, like, oh, I'm just going to go in for the first time to just like practice the test and see how I do. You want to be doing all that practice work and prep at home in the months going into the exam, and then treating every sitting as if you're going to try to take it once. Like, your goal isn't how many times I can take the LSAT. It's, I want to get the highest score every time I take it, ideally only taking it once or twice or maybe a third time. In terms of the time frame, it's nice because it opens up more windows of opportunity for applicants to take the exam at a time period that works for them. But you still want to keep in mind that admissions committees review applications on a rolling basis. So it's to your advantage to get those tests in and finalized, and then submit, earlier in the fall, and not wait to take your LSAT in the spring and then submit in March or April or May.
That makes a lot of sense. And then there's also the question of scholarship money. I would guess that scholarship money, from what I hear, is typically more available earlier in the cycle, and they might be running out over the course of the fall and winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a reason why your personal statement needs to be really strong, is because admissions committees are going to make determinations of admission on your personal statement, right? So it's going to be hugely influential there, but it's also going to help impact merit-based funding, because while some schools, like an NYU, say, for example, has separate scholarship programs you can apply to, and it's a separate essay, a lot of schools are making determinations for merit-based funding on the application you submitted itself. So another reason why you want to take extra care with a personal statement, a diversity statement, making sure those letters of recommendation are as strong as possible.
Sure, that's a great point about the external funding, especially. I hadn't heard too much about that. Now, another big change at LSAC these days is, of course, the transition towards the digital LSAT. It's kind of a big question mark as to how folks are going to do on it in July and then September as these changes take hold. And I'm wondering, in your conversations with admission officers, what do you hear about how they might view the results of someone taking the digital LSAT when they might not be quite as familiar with the format?
So I think that LSAC has kind of anticipated that it's going to be, a shift and that applicants aren't going to be as prepared. So for the July exam, they're going to, just for this one time, allow applicants to see their score first and then decide whether or not to cancel. That to me is such a huge advantage. So I'm working with an applicant now who ended up having to reschedule his exam, and he's sort of asking me what test to sit for. I'm like, take July, because then you have this like one-time opportunity to experiment. And then the further along we go with the digital process, I think the less admissions committees are going to be receptive to an argument that, hey, I wasn't as prepared because the format changed. So, practice digitally, right? Are you familiar with any of blog services that offer digital practicing for LSAT prep?
Yeah, well, LSAC has on their website, they have a free interactive digital LSAT familiarization tool where applicants can actually walk through a real recent exam. I believe it's Prep Test 73, which is from September 2013 or 2014. So yeah, applicants can walk through a full exam at familiar.lsac.org and kind of play around with that.
Yeah. So I would take out all of the advantages of familiarizing yourself with the new format. Law schools are aware that there's a shift. And so if it does impact your score, you can potentially include an addendum, or you can retake, right? Like, I think that law school admissions committees are going to be much more understanding of the need to retake, especially in these early months of the transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose the answer is kind of always to retake, right? Because the numbers are, as we discussed at the beginning, the numbers are necessary. But although, of course, they're not enough, but you do need to have them. And one thing that's standing out to me is that if someone takes the digital LSAT, let's say in September, and they do really well, that might be viewed even more strongly given that the digital LSAT is new at that time. And then and if you don't do well, then just retake. There's the LSAT in October and November and January. So there's always another chance just around the corner.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really true, with the caveat being, don't plan to take it four times, October, November. Plan to take it again once if you can, and familiarize yourself as much as possible with the new format in the interim.
Yeah. One thing that occurs to me, this is just my intuition, is that the average applicant will be retaking it more times, given that it is offered more frequently. You don't have to wait 2 to 3 months anymore. So maybe previously I'm thinking the average applicant might have taken it max 2 or 3 times. But I'm seeing now a shift in the number of times applicants might consider it. Maybe they might take it 3 or 4 times, or at least register for that many test dates. Have you noticed a kind of shift among the folks you're working with?
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that shift taking place. What I advise applicants is, if they are unhappy with their results on an exam, you don't need to necessarily rush to take the next available exam, right? Because you want to figure out, well, what happened on that exam? How can I work to improve my score? If it was an outlier situation where your score was underrepresented because of the new testing format, or because of distractions or personal issues, then go ahead and take it again, more immediately. But if it was something that had to do with actual performance on the content of the exam itself, I would say don't rush to just take the next exam that you possibly can. Take time to self-diagnose and figure out what strategy changes can I implement and practice and perfect, and take more practice tests. Be as prepared as possible the next time you take the exam so you score well.
100% agreed on that. Yeah, you don't want to take it until you feel fairly certain that you're going to get a score that you would be happy with. And you don't need to take it 1 month later if 2 months later would serve you better.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, Michelle. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your sharing advice with everybody. Any final words or advice that you want to share with everyone before we sign off?
Well, if people have questions about their applications themselves, I'm the director of JD Admissions Counseling for Stratus Admissions. So if you go to stratusadmissions.com, we offer free 30-minute consultations. So I would say, go sign up, and then we can talk about your application more specifically, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, that is a really awesome resource. It's really kind of you to be offering that to everybody. I'm going to encourage everyone to go over to Stratus and sign up, get your free 30 minutes, and take it from there.
Yeah, please do.
And that's the best way for folks to get in touch with you as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome, Michelle. Well, this has been a real pleasure. Thanks again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.